Hey guys, what's up? My name is Shikhar, your MBA buddy, and today we are going to talk about resumes. I can argue that resume is the most important part of your application. It is one of the things that many adcoms like to see first when they start assessing an application. Also, during your interviews, your interviewer would use your resume to interview you. So you better make that resume a killer one. So to demonstrate you how to make a great resume, I'm going to show you two resumes, one which is good and one which is great. Both of these resumes are my resume, so I'm not going to differentiate them on the basis of the brand or the designation I have on them, because I literally have the same brands and designation on both of those resumes. I'm solely going to differentiate them on the basis of the content and how I represent that content. But before we delve into that, I want to thank you guys for liking and sharing my ISB interview experience video. If you are one of those viewers who haven't seen that video out, I'm gonna link a card above and you can check that out. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. So let's start with a good resume. I think this is a good resume. It is neat, it is clean, has all the sections which are relevant for your MBA admissions resume. And to be honest, I have impressed quite a few people with this resume. So I think it's a good resume. But I would like to argue that this is a better resume and in fact a great resume. Although you might argue that this looks bit wordy and also it doesn't have any bullet points, rather it looks like paragraphs after paragraphs which are not very readable. But I would argue that this is a better resume and I would tell you why in just a moment. First, we have to understand that one page is all that you have. I would like to share a funny story here. While applying to one of the colleges, there was a clear instruction that please submit a one-page resume. We're gonna ignore all the other pages. So unless you are Elon Musk or have an experience of 10-15 years, you should restrict yourself to a one-page resume. And when you just have one page, then the content is the king. You cannot compromise the content for the look and feel of your resume. If you can manage both content and look and feel of your resume, well, that's great. But definitely you cannot trade off content for look and feel. So be mindful of that. So to showcase you some of the best practices in terms of the design or the format of the resume, let me compare two of my resume. First, avoid using thick margins. You shouldn't have too much margins because you want to use as much real estate on your resume as possible. And to be very honest, both of my resume do a pretty good job in maintaining thin margins. You can see that I haven't wasted a lot of space on the sides and on the top and bottom on both of my resume. So kudos to that. Second, you should avoid using fonts which are big, bulky and are not very clear. And to be very honest, both of my resumes have done a good job in having clear fonts and maintaining a good size. So no problem there as well. The third thing that you want to take care is that avoid using tables which end up wasting lot of space. So this is where my good resume falters. As you can see that I have used table extensively in this resume and I have lot of white spaces that I could have used for putting in more content or making the existing points more impactful. So let's look at each of the section one by one and try and understand why the great resume is great and why the good resume doesn't make the cut. So first, let's start with the education. It's fairly factual section in your resume and you cannot play much around it. So you got to have standard stuff like the degree, institution, CGPA and the year. But in addition to this standard stuff, what I have on my better resume is percentile section. For example, I've mentioned that I was in top 15%, top 20%, which gives a better sense to the adcoms what my CGPA translates to, what my percentages in my class 10 and 12 translate to. So if I say I have 95% and I was in top 10%, then 95% makes sense. Similarly, what I have here is the start and end year of my degrees and the education. So it clearly mentions what was the duration of my degree. So my engineering was of 4 years, my master was of 2 years, which is very much clear from the start and the end year of the degree. Second section would be professional experience. This is the meat of your resume. This is why you actually create your resume, because you want to show what you do in your day-to-day activity as part of your professional life. So this is the meat of your application. You have to get it right. So there are two strategies that you should adopt, and first one is using action verbs. So what are action verbs? Action verbs are nothing but words like owned, conducted, conceptualized, represented, which are there in my good resume, and I've done a fairly good job of starting all my sentences using action verbs. Similarly, I've done the same in my great resume. I have started all my sentences using action verbs. For example, ensure, conducted, designed, managed, all are action verbs, and you should definitely start all your sentences using an action verb. Second strategy that I would like to mention here is using a CAR approach. You can read a lot about CAR on Google, but in summary, it is context, action, result. And to demonstrate you what it is actually in practice, let me pick up one point from each of the resume. In my great resume, I use the CAR approach. In my good resume, I just mentioned that point. So let me pick this point from my associate developer's role, consultant for a S/4HANA cloud product, package best practice content for the out-of-box use. So nothing fancy there, nothing great, it's just a point. It's not impactful in my opinion, but read the same point here. For the context, I have that I ensured packaging best practice content for the out-of-box use of a S/4HANA cloud product. And for the action, I have supporting it in quarterly release cycles, guide the development, user assistant and release teams as a product specialist. And finally, the result, which is the hammer on the nail, generating so and so in a yearly revenue. This makes a lot more sense and is definitely more impactful than the previous statement. Definitely the approach that you should use in making your resume. CAR, context, action, result. Let's move to the next section, which is, before that, let me give you some bonus points. So avoid using industry specific jargons. So suppose you are from oil and gas industry, then don't use jargons that a layman wouldn't understand. Keep your points simple but effective. Second one, highlight judiciously. So to explain this, let me go back to my good resume. So here you can see that I have highlighted everything that I seem important, endorsed by SAP board directors, workshops in Germany, diverse projects. But this really doesn't make any sense. It just lowers the importance of things which are worthy of highlighting. So you have to highlight only 3 things. So anything to do with leadership, anything to do with revenue, anything to do with efficiency. Only highlight these 3 things. Anything else would just lower the importance of these 3 things. And finally, add a company description. This is a very small little point, but adds a whole lot of value. For example, in my good resume, I have just written SAP Labs, but I'm sure that most of you wouldn't know what SAP Labs does. But whereas in my great resume, I have a small description that it is an R&D facility of a German multinational, which gives you a sense of what SAP is all about. So definitely try putting a description for your organization, no matter how much reputed your organization is. So let's move on to next section, which is position of responsibilities and volunteering activities. Again, for this section, I would highly recommend that you use the CAR approach, which is context, action and result. So to demonstrate you that, let's pick one point from both the resume which is similar and tell you how I made that point impactful in my great resume. So for that, I would like to pick the first point. So for the S/4HANA CFND day, I was the track coordinator, presentations and the logistics team. So really it's just fancy names, but nothing of context and result here. So it's not very impactful. So the same point here is that I organized 5+ customer events involving 200 participants from 30 companies. So action and result are clearly there. And the hammer on the nail is that I increase the revenue stream by so and so dollars. So context, action, result. Do not forget this. Let's move on to the other section, which is the extracurricular activity. So for example, let's take the first one. I was the finalist in a startup competition. My team was in the top 6 team out of the 150 plus teams which participated in that competition. Similarly, I have mentioned in my great resume that I was among the top 6 amongst the 150 teams. So what you guys probably do is you mention that you were in the top 6, but you forget to mention that there were 150 other teams out of which you were the top 6. So to elaborate more on this point, let's take the example of Spot Award. Every organization has some kind of monthly award, be it Spot Award in SAP or the Employee of the Month Award in some different organization, Superstar Award, Rockstar Award, and whatnot. But how does one differentiate between the Spot Award in my organization and a Rockstar Award in yours? The only way to do is that how many people were contesting for that award. For example, I have clearly mentioned that I won the award among the 25 other employees who were contesting for the same award. So definitely mention the relative importance of that award in your resume. It's a small little detail, but worthy of addition in your resume. Let's move on to the other section, which is personal interest. And this is where things get interesting. But for the MBA admissions resume, I would really suggest that you either have personal interest or you have a summary on top. Summary on top or the personal interest at the bottom. To me personally, I think having a personal interest is a better option than having a summary. Because look at it this way, your entire resume is about the organizations that you worked for, the schools that you attended, the awards that you won. Everything is very professional, everything is very polished. And this is where the personal interest really comes in handy. It lets you show what you are good at, what you enjoy doing outside your work. For example, I've written all kind of things on my personal interest, my favorite book, journal, show, speech. Also in my other interest, you can see that I have very creatively written that I have bungee jumped from the highest point in India, swam with the whale sharks in Philippines, ice skated in Amsterdam, and desert biking in Dubai. So it shows two things, that I am an adventure seeker and that I love traveling. So if you have a passion, if you have a hobby, then do write it in your personal interest section with the utmost creativity, and you will surely grab a few eyeballs and the interest of your adcoms. But a word of caution here, this is not the only way of doing things. You can do things your own way, but it's a good thing to keep in mind some of the best practices that you should definitely incorporate while creating your resume.